G'day folks, Tony Angus back again with some more information on managing conflict and aggression. And this is part of the Escalating Behaviour series. So we're looking at how people escalate in their behaviour and why. And if you recall, so if you're joining us for the first time, I want you to boot yourself back in time and look at the first 4 of these videos, because otherwise you're gathering information in the wrong order. So, for those of you who have been with me, just a very brief recap. We looked at the model of escalation. I gave you a brief history. We also discussed that conflict typically begins with some form of disagreement, and then there's escalating behaviour as a result of that, or modified, changing behaviour. I also advised you that my role with you is to talk about aggression and not people who escalate in their behaviour and become either seriously depressed or disconsolate. Very, very sad. So if we move along now into the discussion, we had a really good look at what happens when a person is suffering from some sort of loss and their escalating behaviour is of a certain kind. And so perhaps if I make a note on here about the type of escalating behaviour that we're likely to see, the verbals and the body language of a person suffering from some sort of loss are typically going to be, so if it's loss behaviour, number one, typically going to be much more erratic and chaotic and random in thought. So if I put that down here, erratic, and that's going to help us to distinguish the behaviours that we see from people in part 2, or who escalate because of reason number 2. And so we'll get to 2 in a minute. And then we'll get to 3. That makes sense, right? So, what we need to do now is have a look at part number 2, and you'll be happy to know that it's completely the opposite of reason number 1. And the reason I think you'll be happy to know is because everything we talked about, the behaviours, the way that chemistry works in the brain, all of that stuff is pretty much going to be reversed. So it's going to be a little easier. So first of all, what is the opposite to loss? Well, it's not going to take a rocket scientist to work out that that's gain. And so what does that mean? Okay, if a person sees an opportunity from some sort of disagreement, and it may not even be a disagreement, it's an opportunity now to gain from what's going on. So typically we're talking about somebody who seeks to gain something that they shouldn't, to which they're not entitled. Okay, so a gain person is a person who is deliberate in their actions. They're looking at making the most of an opportunity that has presented itself. So, in the previous videos, I've looked at certain examples from public transport and health and education and those sorts of things. So let's use public transport. Let's say, for example, that I'm a passenger and the train is delayed by 10 minutes. Now, if I'm a gain person, I seize an opportunity here and I say, oh, well, so I go up to you as an employee of the train company, for example, and I say, righto, you now owe me, because I'm going to be 10 minutes late. I want a month's free travel for my inconvenience. And so what happens then is typically gain people are much more entitled, and they're looking for whatever they can get from you. So it's a whole different mindset. Now, speaking of mindset, let's have a look at the brain chemistry behind a gain person. We looked with the loss person that the blood flow and electrical activity typically goes into the limbic system, that subconscious brain, the emotional, irrational subconscious brain. With the gain person, however, it stays very much fixed in the human neocortex, the rational brain. Now, I'm not telling you what that means is that they are appropriate in what they're saying. All I'm simply, or even accurate. All I'm simply saying is that the snake is makes a rational choice in their own mind. It's a decision based on choice. Not necessarily so much for the lost person. So the gorilla, remember we called the lost person the gorilla because they're in the mammal brain. So this person, the gain person, stays in the human brain. This is a colder form of aggression. In fact, what psychologists will often do is call loss aggression hot aggression and gain aggression cold aggression. So if that's the case, and this is more a cold-blooded, calculated type of aggression, what animal do you think we should prescribe for the gain person? Cold-blooded? Snake. Okay, so this is because they're a cold-blooded creature and they're doing this in a calculated manner. Now, I don't want anybody to be confused about dropping down into the reptile brain here. That's not what we're saying. I just like to give people an animal to attach to what we're talking about because, you know, it gives you a better opportunity of saying, okay, well, this person, this angry person here in front of me is acting like a gorilla. Therefore, I know it's loss. This person here, you know, that's a bit cold and calculated, a bit slimy. I think they're a snake. So that gorilla and snake idea should hopefully resonate with you. If it doesn't, just stay with loss and gain. So, the gain person stays locked in their rational brain, which means these are decisions. And if they're decisions being made, then it means that typically their behaviour is going to be a lot more focused. Okay, so this is not erratic, it's focused. So we'll talk about that as we go. In the meantime, I'm going to write focused up here. So what does that mean, focused? It means that it's much more deliberate, it's concentrated, it's calculated. This is a contrived behaviour. Oh, they might wave their arms and they might make a big song and dance, but you almost get the sense that it's an act. Okay, so let's go to body language and facial expressions. Typically, with the snake, it's not that, because it's not heat driven, they don't get that incredibly screwed up face and tense demeanour. It's not fight or flight, you see, because they're staying in the rational brain. This is a rational choice they're making, not a fight or flight. And fight or flight was what makes the big body language changes in the gorilla, but not so in the snake. So they might wave their arms around, but it's not that tense, really frustrated, abrupt and aggressive sort of gesture. In fact, it might even be more for show, because the snake tends to like an audience. So they might look around and wave and go, oh, is that right? And they like the chance to feel downtrodden. So if they're, let's use a hospital waiting room as an example. If you say something to the snake that they don't appreciate as they're escalating, they might wave their arms and look around at the rest of the waiting room and get attention and say, oh, look, you know, did you hear how she treated me? Wow, is this the professional organisation I'm dealing with? It's that sort of gathering in, look at me, look at me. You know what I mean? So, much more focused, much more deliberate. That means that the body language is not going to be as tense, not as tight. The face is not going to make the same expressions. In fact, the face might even find opportunity to smile. It might be a wry grin or a smirk. That sort of thing is available more to the snake because they're in control more. When we move up to the verbals, you're going to get the same language. So we talked about the gorilla maybe starting out with some sarcasm and some questioning and then some challenging and insulting and those sorts of things. But the biggest difference is going to be that the gorilla is, because it's dropping out of the rational brain and into the limbic system. Now, here's an interesting side note. Your ability to speak, your speech, comes from regions within the neocortex. So I'll just put little crosses there. So your ability to speak is a conscious effort. We choose, actively select words to convey a message. The fact that we can do it really quickly simply means that we're practiced at it, and our brain knows how to very quickly select these words. But when you deny that rational brain blood flow and electrical activity, it struggles to speak. And so the gorilla typically trips over their words a lot, stumbles, uses very base language, swears a bit. It's not very fluid, the language. They might be unable to roll out a sentence in one go. So it's much more sort of stilted. You might get them to say something like, yeah, well, you know, how come this always, I can't even believe it. So it's broken. A lot of base language, don't forget. I'm not going to do all the swearing that a gorilla might do here, but you get the idea. Now, that doesn't mean that the snake won't swear. It just means that they swear because that's either their natural language or because they see it as a means to an end. Remember, a snake's aggression is a means to an end. What are they trying to aim at? Well, they're trying to jump ahead in a queue, or they're trying to get something free, or they're trying to get a discount, or they're trying to get a refund, or it may even be that they're trying to get you fired. Now, those are the things they might gain, but they might also gain status. So you might get a snake actually say to you, well, what are your qualifications in this field? Well, I've got a degree at blah, 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 blah. And so they start to big note themselves because a snake wants to feel dominant. That's part of what they're there to gain. And if they can gain some sense that they are superior, then that is going to help them, or that is going to encourage them to escalate. So one of the things we need to talk about too here with aggression is there's two types of aggression. That I can be demonstrably loud and very intimidating, or I can be intimidating in a quiet and sinister manner. So I might say something to, I might be in a school dealing with the principal, and I might say, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Now that quiet voice and that direct gaze and the correct selection of words is not a very well concealed threat, a very thinly veiled threat, but it's a threat nonetheless. But it's a sinister behaviour, and sinister is not something that the gorilla can do. So if you come across a person who's able to conduct themselves in a sinister manner, then they're a snake. So one of the things we can attach ourselves to in relation to the verbals is that a snake has a greater command of language, is better able to attach themselves to speech, doesn't stumble over their words as much, and typically is able to use the language for its purposes, whereas the gorilla isn't. In fact, there's a sense in which the gorilla is replacing language with with physical. So this replaces, well, I'm really upset. Does that make sense? So if I come to you and I say, look, I'm really upset about this is absolutely not good enough, then I'm very well contained and coping well. But if I go, oh, that's the same message, this isn't good enough, but it's delivered more by a gorilla body language. So the gorilla typically wants to replace physicality, wants to replace the verbals with physicality. So just understand that. The snake, not so. The snake is perfectly happy to win with words, perfectly happy to trip you up with its knowledge on legislation or protocol or policies or whatever, perfectly happy to. Okay. So that gives us a clue as to how we can tell the demeanour of a snake in comparison with the demeanour of a gorilla. Now typically, the gorilla will posture up, now the snake will as well, but typically the snake won't be physical. And so what happens quite often with a snake is that the line turns here. and goes in that direction. And the reason is that the snake knows there's nothing to be gained. Remember, they're after gain. The snake knows that there's very little to be gained by being physical with you, because there's potential that they are thrown out, charged by the police, or that you'll defend themselves and smash them one. And so the idea is, typically the snake understands that they shouldn't be physical with you. However, the snake will push every button. In fact, the snake might attempt to elicit a physical response from you unnecessarily, so that they can play the victim card and sue you, etc. So that's one of the things that they might do. Just be very cautious of that. In fact, be cautious of this. Like rock, paper, scissors, the snake beats the gorilla. So if you end up in an argument with a snake, don't let that snake turn you into a gorilla, because you will be less clear in your thinking and they will dominate. This is a game for the gainers. It's a snake game. So my encouragement for you, and the next post I'm going to talk to you about the language we use for the snake. But right now, don't play the snake's game. Don't try and beat them at it. Don't do any of that. Okay, so the snake is a manipulative person. One of the things I said to you is that every one of us can be a gorilla. When things go wrong and there's lost behavior, every single one of us can become that gorilla depending on the loss. However, that's not the case with a snake. I think it's intrinsic to personality that the snake will use that cold aggression, that manipulative aggression, to get what they want from you. Okay, so understand that's a very different thing. So it's also learned behavior. They've either learned from their own journey that this is how you get what you want, or they've learned from their parents, they've learned from significant elders. They've watched other people and they've come to believe that the way to be and the way to win and the way to gain in this world is to manipulate others. Now, it's a fairly small percentage of the population that can do that, and it's a smaller percentage that can do it well. But when they do it well, they do it better than you can imagine. So don't enter the arena with them. There is a category of snake behaviors that will escalate to physical, and that's those that are going through some sort of peer pressure. So I'll pick peers here. So if they're pressured by their peers to achieve something in order to be accepted into their ranks, then they may be physical. And we found this in youth detention centres where kids would hurt someone else in order to be part of the team, the crew, to be in the top gang. So that peer pressure might lead them to, and they're not doing it out of loss, they're doing it to gain acceptance with the top dog and his mates. So that is that, but they're less concerned about the repercussions when they're thinking that way. Okay, so an initiation into a gang, for example, has nothing to do with loss, even though they're very physical. It has more to do with, I want my peers to accept me, therefore there's a gain attached to that. All right. So the mechanism of the snake is very, very different. Now, next post, I'm going to talk to you about how you communicate if you choose to communicate. I'm not telling you to communicate, but we've got to have communication strategies. So if you choose to communicate with the snake, how do we go about it? How do we do that effectively? And that's going to be very important. So stick with me. Guys, like always, I don't want to say it every single video, but I think I have to. Hit like, click share, and please subscribe to the channel and share it with your mates. I mean, this is information that everybody can learn so that you get your stuff right. Your conflict management strategy should be much more finely tuned than they are. All right. Thanks again for having me in your home and your workplaces. I enjoy every time I get to speak to you, and I enjoy your feedback. So I hope you have a good day. It's a little overcast in Melbourne today, but it's going to be warm, so I'm going to